Now it's time for Q&A. Dr. Janice Anderson of the STEMIE Center at the FPG Child Development Institute School of Education will be answering questions about her presentation, Computational Thinking for Each and Every Child. Dr. Jessica Amsbary is the moderator.
Hi, everyone. We're excited you're here and look forward to questions. I hope this information was useful to you and that you gained some insights from the presentation. Welcome, Janice. Thank you for putting together that amazing video. And I think I can start the questions, Janice.
Sure.
Yeah, and I know this is one that I wonder about a lot, and you may or may not have ideas related to it, but I always think along the lines of the very most basic foundational computational thinking skills for infants and toddlers. And whether you have any thoughts, I have a few thoughts of my own that I can share too, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what is computational thinking for like a baby?
So that's a good question. I will put out there, infant toddler is not my area. But, having a child of my own, I think one of the things that I've always done with him since he was a baby is setting up order for him, setting up directions like, well, let's do this first and then we'll do this activity, or then here's our clothes, and once we finish our clothes, we're going to go brush our teeth, and creating those routines. And so those routines essentially are algorithms for thinking. And so you can start doing that, from the time that they're an infant on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think along those exact same lines, and I think even going down to very basic representation skills, like even simple matching objects to pictures to get that little basic piece of knowledge.
Right, looking for patterns with toddlers when they're playing with their blocks, and let's put all the blue blocks in this pile and all the red blocks in this pile.
Yeah.
Or if they build a wall, and you can look for the patterns if they're using Legos. Look for the patterns in Legos. So, what was the pattern that you used to make that? Right. And using that kind of language with them. Using everyday language, and then, you can eventually scaffold in some of the more computational thinking language, but they're getting the basic principles behind the thinking.
Yeah, definitely. So we've had a couple questions come on in, and this first one comes from Miriam, and she asks, what teaching methods can be used to improve computational thinking for children with special needs? And I know I'll start answering this one, Janice, and then invite you to add more. But Miriam, I think as far as teaching methods, they're basically the same teaching methods for any child with the necessary adaptations so that all children can engage. And I know there was one brief slide with a couple suggested adaptations depending on the child's needs and interests, such as making materials bigger and more accessible. I think one teaching method that can, as long as children are not visually impaired, if they can see pictures, pairing visual cues with activities can be really a useful teaching method for children with special needs. Doing different kinds of patterns if they are visually impaired, like texture patterns, sound patterns, movement patterns. I think there's a lot of different adaptations that can be used to teach computational thinking for children with special needs. I hope that was enough info, Miriam, but Janice, do you have anything?
No, I think what you said is absolutely correct. And the thing is, everybody needs to be able to engage with algorithms in directions, regardless of the additional needs that they have. There's still going to be things that they're going to need to know and be able to do in their way. And so, I think it's just important to work with them, work with children where their needs are at their level, and create the scenarios and the experiences for them that will meet them at those needs.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, on to the next question, which is, what do you think is the most challenging component of computational thinking to teach young children?
I don't really see it as a challenging component. It's actually a lot of fun because when you think about these things, there's lots of things that you do with kids that involve these ideas. If you go to the beach, if you live on the coast and you go to the beach, building a sandcastle can become an algorithm. And there's actually a children's book. It's how to code a sandcastle. It's by Josh Funk, and there's a whole series of these books, how to build a roller coaster. And it's taking something that the children are familiar with and reconstructing it or talking about it in a way that's bringing computational thinking into it. There's a number of toys that are out there that children can engage with, like a Code and Go mouse, which that allows them to create a pattern to make the mouse find the cheese. And the pattern is using arrows and colors to figure out the pattern, to create the algorithm and figure out what the pattern is going to be to get the mouse from point A to point B to get to the cheese. So there's a lot of things that are out there that can be used. Osmo has a number of computational coding toys that are geared for kids from, say, age 4 up. But even some of their other math games can be adapted to looking at things like patterns, and which are all part of computational thinking. So I think the challenging part is, from at least from my perspective, is just deciding on one way to engage the children. What's going to be the best way for that child to get them exposed and start experiencing some of those concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've sort of touched on this in a number of different presentations, and it's not necessarily a challenging component, but it's more of a obstacle to computational thinking and STEM in general is the language. I think people get intimidated when we start calling a step-by-step process an algorithm. I think in the long run, it's really cool to think of that as an algorithm, as a teacher, as a parent, like, yeah, we're doing an algorithm. But at the same time, telling someone, you sort of need to ease into, I think, some of the language.
And you don't have to use that language. Have kids talk about what they're doing in their own words. Mm-hmm. The language can be scaffolded in at any point in time. And when kids are early on, they don't need to know, that following those directions or creating those patterns or that order is an algorithm. Mm-hmm. That's your job to know that as the teacher that it's an algorithm. Mm-hmm. But for them, just being able to explain what they're doing, that's the key component. That's the key thing. The language will come later.
Yeah, that's true. Although I do see some kids that might really like to go home and say they did an algorithm.
That's true. And you're going to have that variation. So you got, again, look at where the kids are, what is their particular level that they're at, and meet them where they are. And if a kid is, capable of taking on that language, then that's great. Let's scaffold it in. Mm-hmm. But if they're not, that's okay too. They can describe what they're doing in their own words.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Very good answer. Our next question comes from Asha, and it's about computational thinking and using it in inclusive settings and sharing experiences. So Asha, yes, I think that at STEMIE, that is our main goal, is to make sure that computational thinking is embedded in all early childhood settings, including inclusive settings. So I think at STEMIE, we're working on specific activities that target computational thinking for inclusive settings that also include, homes and child care centers, and we have hit a little bit of a roadblock in the COVID era, and that we haven't been able to go into our centers as of yet. But we will be doing that as soon as we can, and intend for the activities to be accessible to all the students in any given classroom, so in an inclusive setting. I hope that's a decent answer for you. Moving on to our next question is from Mary Alice, and she asks, is computational thinking building blocks the same for 10 plus years old? So I'm not sure. Do you know? I'm going to just defer to you, Janice.
Okay. So it is the same process. Now, what tools you're using might differ a little bit. So, for example, maybe the 10-year-old is going to use a software like Scratch, or is going to get more into some of the Osmo coding programs, like they have Coding Jam, Coding Duo, and Coding for Obby. So the tools that they use might be slightly different, but the process is still the same, regardless of what age group you're talking about. Excuse me. So there's a number of tools that are out there. There are actually some coding blocks, and the name of them right now is escaping my brain. But where you actually program individual blocks to do things, and when you put the blocks together in a particular order, they're going to move in a certain way. So again, there's a lot of different things that are out there. Lego has some building kits for older children that involve coding, and the We Do and the Boost kits in particular for younger, up to about 5th grade. So yes, it is the same thing, but maybe the tools might be a little different.
Okay, great. Thank you. My next question comes from Miss Eva. Would it be frowned upon to say something like, "Oh, I love the algorithm you just used," and then when they ask, say algorithm or the steps you used? That's a good question, and I think the answer is it wouldn't be frowned upon, no. But if you sense a feeling of disengagement, or the child is somehow intimidated by that word, perhaps just rephrase. But I think it's cool. I think it's cool to use the terminology. What do you think, Janice?
No, I agree. If the word looks like it's scaring the child, then I would say, okay, no, it's just the steps that you're doing, and back away. So just tell me more about that. But absolutely, you could use the words in that way.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then my next question is coming from Karen, and she's asking, so sort of along the same lines, I think, but would you say it is best to be intentional in pointing out computational thinking in everyday activities rather than to come up with special programs, activities for the purpose of teaching computational thinking? That's part one. And then the part two is, or should educators, librarians, and parents be doing both, even at an early age? I'll go first on this one, and then Janice, I will defer to you
Sure.
to add on to it. But I think absolutely, especially for our young children, embedding into daily routines and activities is key, especially in our current era of COVID-19, where we're at home hoping to teach every day during embedded activities, or during our daily routines and activities. But I do think there's value in targeting computational thinking. But due to the fact that it lends itself so well to what we're already doing, I just see so much value in integrating it. But what about you, Janice? Would you like me to read the question again? Would that be helpful?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Karen asked, would you say it's best to be intentional in pointing out computational thinking in everyday activities rather than to come up with special programs, activities for the purpose of teaching computational thinking.
So I think, again, kind of building off of what you said, yeah, integrating is, I think, key. Anytime you can integrate and get people to realize that they're doing this in everyday life, then it becomes less scary, because when it's kind of the same with science. When people hear the word science, they're afraid of science. Same with math or engineering. They're like, I can't do those things. So when you show them that they are doing those things and they're doing those things in their everyday life, then it becomes less scary. And then you can start introducing, when you see a child take an interest in something, then you can introduce those more specialized programs. So I see that you really like creating these patterns. So let's try to make a pattern here with this Lego kit, and let's see if we can make a robot that moves. So starting them with the everyday and making them understand that this is something they can do, and then extending it into something that's a little bit more complex and challenging.
Yeah, I think that's great. And we're at a little bit of a lull. Oh wait, I just got another question from Mary Alice, and she's asking if you have any tips for creating lesson plans that reverse engineers an activity into computational thinking. I'm wondering if a lesson plan that maybe integrates engineering and computational thinking.
So I think, I don't know, think about it in terms of backwards design. What's your end goal? What's the end goal of what you want children to get out of whatever activity it is that you're doing? So looking at that end goal and then figuring out what are the skills that are going to help you get to that end goal. So I think, that's the best. That's how I approach things when I'm trying to look at a toy. So for example, Fisher-Price has it's called a caterpillar. And each segment of the caterpillar is a different code that will make the caterpillar do a different activity or pattern or something. So one of the things that when I was looking at that toy, I was thinking about some of my pre-service teachers who are early childhood up through kindergarten, and how would they look at this toy? How could they use this toy to start to integrate computational thinking? And so thinking about creating patterns, understanding that when they put the caterpillar with one set of patterns, the caterpillar is going to react one way. But if we take it apart and put it back together differently, you're going to have a different effect. So again, you're also teaching that science concept of cause and effect. So when you're doing computational thinking, you're not doing it in isolation. You're doing it in conjunction with a lot of other disciplinary areas, including science.
Yeah, that is very true. I think when the T in STEM is conceptualized as computational thinking, it's very inclusive of many, if not all, of the cross-cutting concepts we see in STEM. So I think there was a resource that I wanted to bring up related to computational thinking for preschoolers too. And I've been trying to fit it in to one of the questions, but I'm going to go ahead and share it. And that is the WGBH Digital Kids out of Boston. They have a computational thinking for preschoolers with a bunch of a website with different activities. We will put it on the STEMIEFest website as well, so you all can access it. But there's also something called Keep in the Big Wide World that I know many of you already know about, and all of the resources that Alyssa had mentioned earlier today, if you were at her presentation, all her resources are going to be posted as well. I did just see a new question come up, Janice, and it is from Leilani, and she would like to know, what have you seen between children who have had teaching using the algorithm than those that have had parents or adults doing everything for them? I think that you're asking, this sounds a little bit like independence to me. Janice, do you want to take the first?
So I think, I think what is what you're asking, having teachers teach the algorithm versus parents.
I think it's about whether, if you've seen differences between children who have learned the step-by-step idea of an algorithm for themselves, as opposed to having the parents do it for them.
Right. So it is interesting watching kids at play with this when you put these types of computational thinking toys in front of them. And it is interesting. You seem to have like two types of kids. The ones that are going to jump in and try to figure it out themselves. And then you're going to have a group of kids that are going to look at you like, what am I supposed to do with this? And so now how, as a parent, do you scaffold that so that they are actually the ones that do that, as opposed to you doing it for them? So I think the best thing I can suggest there for that is that really try to let the children try it on their own, and scaffold it there, and maybe ask them probing questions as they're working through things, and maybe say, well, that's interesting that you did it that way. Can you tell me why? Why did you put those two pieces together like that? What do you think is going to happen? And getting them to make predictions about what they think is going to happen. So, I mean, that's usually how I've approached things with my own son, and how I work with my teachers to approach it with their students.
Yeah, so I think we want to encourage children to engage and right. Figure out the steps involved in an algorithm or a step-by-step kind of a process.
Right, and figure out the appropriate scaffolds. Like, what is an appropriate scaffold for this particular child? And not just you jumping in and saying, well, just let me show you how to do this. Letting them figuring it out. And it's okay to have failure. Failure is part of learning. And so having it not work is okay. Then they try again and redesign what it is that they're doing, which again is part of engineering design frameworks and design thinking. So again, you get that interdisciplinary type of approach.
Yeah. That's really great. I did, Miss Eva, I posted the links to both the WGBH Kids and Peep in the Big Wide World to the chat box. So you should be able to get to that. And then I also added one more, which is Aha Island, which is stories for preschoolers about computational thinking. And I think we should point out, too, that computational thinking doesn't begin at preschool necessarily. As we sort of started, it's foundational thinking skills that we can target even with infants and toddlers, beginning with basic symbolic representation and moving on to simple patterns and simple sequences and things like that. I did see something in the chat about assistive technology and computational thinking, and whether you can use assistive technology in computational thinking. And I think the answer to that is yes, in the same way that you would use assistive technology in teaching or learning any kind of new concept. So, for example, if a student is using a communication device as his or her assistive technology, you can use that device to help the child develop his or her steps to complete a task. They would just communicate through the assistive technology instead of verbally. And I think, pairing the visuals is a really useful support. It's very low tech, so low tech assistive technology, but can still be useful. Do you have any additional insights into that, Janice?
No, I think you pretty much covered it.
Okay. And then, and there's actually, this is Elon who answered if there are assistive devices to enhance computational thinking. And that, Janice, do you know the answer to that?
I do not know a lot about assistive devices. That's kind of out of my area.
And some of I do know that there are some coding tools developed by folks at Georgia Tech that are supposed to be accessible. And I'm blanking on the name, but we can include that in our links of resources. Oh, thank you. It's the Zyrobotics people at Georgia Tech are developing accessible coding tools. So that's another thing you can check out. So that's one, Elon. But I did want to take a minute, Janice, to thank you for being here and providing your expertise to us, and ask if you have any final thoughts or resources that we didn't get to.
So really, I think my message would be that, computational thinking is really things that we do every day. It's problem solving. And it's not just about coding, although coding is a part of it. But it's things that we all do. And it's just getting kids to understand the connections between what they're already doing and what more formalized computational thinking activities are, and seeing that connection. And hopefully that then will make them, less frightened of participating in computational thinking, and maybe start them off on a trajectory that will lead to further study in that.
Yes. Yeah, I think that I just saw a comment in the chat box that Masiva posted, and I think I like this as a closing statement. She said, in other words, stop overthinking computational thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
It's for everyone. It's for babies. It's for toddlers. It's for preschoolers. It's for all children and adults. Adults shouldn't be intimidated by it.
Absolutely. All
right. So we're going to end now and I think close for the day, but enjoy the rest of STEMIEFest, everyone. Thank you.